Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Friday, December 12th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, at the Veterans Affairs Department, cyber dominance is in, cyber compliance is out. Plus, new rules in the NDAA aim to cut red tape in defense contracting. But will they deliver? Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency doesn't want to leave companies hanging when they reach out with a bold new innovation or tech development. So CISA this month unveiled its industry engagement platform, where people can sign up to communicate directly with agency officials. For more on the new platform, Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday spoke with the Chief Information Officer at CISA, Bob Costello.
We want, deep engagement with the private sector, technology innovators, and it can sometimes be honestly hard to schedule meetings with the government or share what you've been working on. So we started earlier this year with an initiative to ease that process, but also provide us a way to track internally what's been shared with us, how do we schedule meetings, and honestly, back to just relationship management, who have we talked to at these companies and the products that we've seen. So it does start with an external portal where people can sign up for essentially a CISA account. And this does also feed into our new model of eventually you will only have to have one account to work with CISA. Whether you're one of our cyber hygiene partners or trying to work with us from industry engagement, we're getting to the point where, that will be a single interface. And then from there, you go through an information collection process that's quite easy. We tried to use kind of like the design format that's used when we now all do our taxes online. It's very easy to fill out different blocks and the information requested. And it even gives industry, the capability to suggest meeting times when they're available. And then on the back end, we can actually do analytics on all this data, but also the system will help schedule the meetings and do a whole bunch of other things to make sure that the right people are on the call for when it occurs.
Yeah, and this seems much more dynamic than the traditional way that the government does this sort of engagement through RFIs or through industry days, which obviously are often just kind of single point in time engagements. Mm-hmm. How do you see that helping to advance CISA's mission and what you're doing with technology specifically?
Well, and I think you brought up a great point. Industry days are wonderful. RFIs serve a very strong purpose to, we're going out there, give us your ideas. We can get them out very quickly. I see this as an augmentation to those other methods of working with us. What we really want to encourage is, first, I'm a strong believer, CIOs have to be in the customer service industry. We run service desks, help desks. When industry reaches out, there's nothing worse than when a customer reaches out and it goes into a mailbox. Someone accidentally misses it. It doesn't get tracked. What this allows us to do on our side is be good stewards of that. So when people reach out, we're able to fully track it. It also helps us help vendors as well, too, so that they're not reaching out to 18 different parts of the agency, having to meet with 18 different parts to share their ideas. I do see it as advancing our transparency and accessibility to working with us, which I think are very key initiatives. So much innovation happens in the private sector as well as in, research labs and elsewhere. But we really want to hear from all those innovators that maybe sometimes just don't even know how to contact us. Big companies, they know how to find us. But you have a great idea and maybe you're a small 4-person shop. It can be intimidating figuring out how to contact a government agency and request a meeting to show them what you've invented, or actually have had great success in the commercial sector, but are trying to break into the the government sector.
Yeah, and as far as what industry should know about engaging with this platform, is there anything specific that you want to highlight as far as the capabilities or what folks should know about using it?
We definitely want to refer people. If you Google it, doing business with CISA, kind of pulls up the webpage and we have all the instructions on there. We also want feedback too. We kind of consider this version like 1.0. We did some good testing with it and worked with a lot of different groups, but we want industry to come back and say, hey, maybe if you made this change, it would be a little bit easier. But that doing business with CISA website has extensive information on how you can interact with us, see upcoming RFPs that are posted on the department's advanced acquisition forecast system, and it'll talk you through all the steps to start using the system, very rapidly.
As far as some of the initial areas of interest for CISA, I know that your press release listed different things like IT and security controls, data analytics, communications technologies. Anything specific that you would want to highlight, especially in your role as the CIO and what you're looking to do with technology transformation at CISA?
Sure. And I think, just echoing Acting Director Gautam Makala's press release, you hit on them. Data analytics, post-quantum, artificial intelligence of all flavors. We're very interested in what's occurring in the private sector. Some of the other areas I'm particularly interested in, we are always trying to find new ways to get things in our customers' hands or the operators' hands faster. So there's a lot of good work being done on, testing, automated testing of IT solutions, automated or AI-based, red teaming of systems is very interesting to us. And not just vulnerability scanning, but helping to determine if your system or asset is actually vulnerable to the vulnerability that's being disclosed, or if you have other compensating controls in place that make it so that, patching within 10 minutes is not really required because you're not vulnerable to this unless all these other things are actually checked off. And that's kind of like the next generation of understanding how we do vulnerability management.
And you mentioned that on the back end, you could do some data analytics with some of the information that is taken in from this platform. Do you have any more you can share there just about what type of data you might be interested in as far as just the business and the industry side of this?
Yeah. So on our side, when people sign up, we learn a little bit about their company. So we'll be able to, in time, produce, metrics like we've talked to people in this type of technology sector, like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity tooling. And one of our other ways is we really want to make things not just easier for industry to work with us, but we want to really make it smoother on our side. And you can imagine how laborious it is. Like a vendor contacts us, it goes into a mailbox, a human takes that, tries to schedule a meeting with 10 different groups. That's a lot of hours spent on work that could be better spent for the American people by that federal employee or the group doing it. So I think what we're going to see first and foremost is hopefully shifting to the left, or a shorter time period from when a vendor contacts us expressing interest in the scheduling of that meeting, because we have the system kind of handling all of that. And I think in time, we'll be able to build, a better, these are all kind of CRM-based tools, customer relationship management tooling, who we're interacting with, how often we've talked to a vendor, and that can help tracking over time. Sometimes we get a briefing and it can be a little like Shark Tank. Maybe we're interested, maybe one group's interested, or we see something here, but it's not quite ready for an investment. Come back and talk to us in 6 months. And then we're able to actually kind of track that progress in the system as well, too. So I think that's very helpful overall, and that whole business relationship that we have with industry.
That's Bob Costello, CIO at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, speaking with Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. You can find Justin's story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, new rules in the NDAA aim to cut red tape in defense contracting. But will they deliver? This is The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The National Defense Authorization Act looks to rewrite the playbook for cost accounting and pricing, with changes that could ease burdens but raise new questions. We'll explore the details and the stakes with Zach Prince, partner at Haynes Boone. Zach, it's great to have you on.
Great to be here, Terry.
We're going to talk about the National Defense Authorization Act. It's in its final stages. It's not a short read, 3,100 pages, but there's a lot of particular detail in there, especially around changes to cost and pricing rules. Start kind of at the headline level. What's the big news that you want people to know?
Sure. So we're still digesting this. So, I want to caveat that, it is 3,100 pages and there's a lot here and it might not become final. But I think Congress has been listening while industry over the past many years has been saying that they're reluctant to invest too heavily in defense when Congress makes programs subject to annual appropriations that might, for seemingly no apparent reason, go away after major investments have been made, when huge regulatory burdens can get imposed, like the cost accounting standards, which deviate substantially from generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP, and things like certified cost of pricing data are required, and just a slew of regulatory requirements that come with doing business with the government. These are real burdens to industry and real burdens to investors thinking about getting involved in the space. So listening to all of that, Congress took quite a bit of action in this NDAA.
Let's talk about some of those. You mentioned cost accounting standards. One of the biggest shifts is bumping that threshold from $50 million to $100 million. Who does that help, and what kind of burden does it remove?
So just as a bit of background, the cost accounting standards are accounting rules that apply to certain contractors that have contracts over size thresholds when otherwise exemptions don't apply. They were imposed starting in the late 60s, an effort spearheaded by the late Admiral Rickover, and this, I think, mistaken belief that contractors were using accounting practices to get something over on the taxpayer. And so all these rules mostly came into effect in the 70s and have stayed essentially the exact same since then, with some slight tweaks around the edges. But they deviate substantially from the accounting practices that most companies would otherwise have implemented. So they require really sweeping shifts in the way that you do a lot of your basic accounting as a company, and they apply on a contract-by-contract basis. So you might only have one or two contracts that are subject to CAS as opposed to your general GAAP rules. But because it's very challenging to have two different sets of books and records, you might just have to implement these very annoying, onerous rules across your entire organization, at least across your segment. I don't want to go too far into the weeds. There's a lot of complication here. It's a burden, and it doesn't apply to small businesses, but it does apply to quite a lot of companies that would have large government contracts. And companies don't want to trigger the threshold that gets them into a CAS-covered contract performance because of the burden.
And so by raising it to $100 million, more folks will not have to worry about that conversion, right?
Yeah, that's right. But I'd say the bigger item here that's kind of buried, and if you look at the congressional report that they issued from the conference, it kind of ignores this, even though I think it's a much bigger deal. It raises the exemption floor. So there are two different types of CAS coverage. There's modified CAS coverage, and there's full CAS coverage. Full is the much more onerous one, but a contract is entirely exempt from CAS, full and modified, if it's below certain dollar thresholds. So the $100 million, formerly $50 million, that's for full CAS. But a contract is totally exempt from CAS no matter what. Under the previous rules, if it was below $2 million or $2.5 million, the threshold changed. Now they're raising that to $35 million. So huge difference. And it makes a difference not just for modified CAS, but also for full CAS, because full CAS coverage is triggered by either a single contract of $100 million or greater, or net $200 million in the prior cost accounting period. So if you had $200 million in contracts in the prior year, none of which exceeded $35 million under this new regime, you still are not going to have a contract subject to full CAS. So I don't know what the numbers exactly are in terms of impact to contractors, but I have to imagine that this is going to exempt a whole slew of contracts that previously would have been subject to CAS.
I'm speaking with Zach Prince. He's a partner at Haynes Boone. So some people may be wiping their brow and thinking they're going to get a reprieve here. But Congress has asked for a report on how many of these changes are going to play out. What would success look like? What do you think they're hoping the impact of some of these changes will be?
So I think that they're hoping this is going to spur greater investment, particularly by successful commercial technology companies and by successful investors in the defense space, and particularly cutting-edge defense tech. And if you look at the multi-year appropriation provisions that are part of this NDAA, and they touch on some of the really interesting and important areas for advancement, like material composition issues, hypersonics, things along those lines, autonomous programs of various sorts, that we really are concerned that we could lose an edge to competitors overseas, and that there needs to be substantial private sector money to go into because there needs to be huge scientific breakthroughs, and that stuff's costly.
Tell us a little bit more about the multi-year provision, because you mentioned up front that companies are reluctant to invest if they're going to be on an annual appropriation cycle.
Yeah, and we'll see how some of this plays out, but I think we all are familiar with major defense programs over the years that have been abruptly cut back for various reasons. But you look at the Zumwalt class destroyer, for example, where there was a huge buy that was initially authorized and that was then cut back, which of course means that suddenly the R&D costs that were distributed over, say, 20 ships are now bunched into 3 or 4. And now the program looks like it costs way more than initially was planned on a ship-by-ship basis, which technically is true, but is not really true overall, and it results in scrutiny and program cancellation. So, I think from my experience talking to folks in the private sector, they hear about programs like that where there have been huge investments that things are then abruptly cut, and they don't want to get involved in the ecosystem that has those problems. And they know that, especially recently when we've got CR after CR, you can't rely on Congress necessarily to provide funding in a timely fashion, even for pretty important programs.
There's another newsy bit in here. You and I talk quite a bit about contract protests. There's a provision that allows DOD to withhold payments during protests. Spin that out for us a bit.
Yeah, this is one that I've been watching pretty closely for a while, and we'll see how it plays out. But there's been a concern. I continue to maintain that this concern is not supported by the data, but a concern that incumbent contractors will protest at GAO, which has a mandatory stay that kicks in order to take advantage of a bridge contract that might be issued. That the government says, okay, well, you've lost the contract, but you're still doing the work. We need the work to continue. We can't go ahead and override the stay without some scrutiny, so we'll just give you a 100-day bridge contract while this plays out. You'll get whatever revenues you're going to get from that period and continue. I do think that this is a non-issue. It ignores the fact that protests are very expensive. The revenues you might get over a 100-day period are really not particularly significant in the grand scheme of things, especially when you're irritating your customer. The data don't show that this is abused very much, other than the idea that incumbents do protest more, but they also win more, which suggests that they're in a better position to know when there are problems in a procurement. But set all that aside, DOD in prior years has said, well, Congress, we can't require disgorgement of profits for these bridge contracts, which is what Congress had considered before as something that might remedy the situation, because we don't track the data. How do you calculate what a profit is for this period of time? So in response, Congress has come back and said, okay, so we're just going to authorize contracting officers to withhold payments, period, under these bridge contracts up to 5% of total amounts that would be owed. And that those amounts up to that 5% threshold, which I think they established because it's a rough order of magnitude of what profits might be, that could be deemed forfeit if there's a decision ultimately that the protests lacked any legal or factual basis. There are a lot of terms here that are going to need careful definition and a lot of uncertainty of who's implementing this, how you'll challenge it, where you'll challenge it. I mean, I think that this is a can of worms to address a problem that's not real, but nonetheless, this is what Congress ended up doing.
I've been speaking with Zach Prince. He's a partner at Haynes Boone. Zach, I know you'll be reading this in much more detail, but thanks for flagging the high points for us.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Hear the Federal Drive on demand. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, federal leaders face the challenge of restoring stability and agency performance after months of workforce disruption. But first, at the Veterans Affairs Department, cyber dominance is in, cyber compliance is out. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The Veterans Affairs Department is moving toward a more operational approach to cybersecurity. That means VA is applying a deeper focus on protecting the attack surfaces and closing off threat vectors that put veterans' data at risk. For more on how VA is changing its cybersecurity posture, Federal News Network Executive Editor Jason Miller caught up with Eddie Poole, the Acting Principal Assistant Secretary for Information and Technology and Acting Principal Chief Information Officer at VA.
We are adopting a strategy of cyber dominance. And what that is that's a move away from the traditional exclusively compliance-based approach to cybersecurity, where we put a lot of our time, resources, investments in compliance-based activities. For example, did someone check the box on a form? Did someone file something in the right place, et cetera, et cetera? And we're really moving a lot of our focus over to the risk-based approach to security, pushing things like zero trust architecture, microsegmentation of our networks, and really doing things that are more focused on the operational landscape, more focused on protecting those attack surfaces and closing off those threat vectors in the cyberspace. And so that's probably one of the most exciting things that we're doing here is really turning the dime on how we approach this. And like I said, the goal is really cyber dominance from a VA perspective and to be a leader in this area across federal government. So that's one of the areas. There are several other things we're doing. With this administration, we've been given an unprecedented opportunity to really standardize on the technologies, the tools, the processes that we use for our enterprise level services. And so in the old days, we may have to support 15 to 20 different products for 15 to 20 different versions of basically the same outcome we're after, just through a bunch of disparate legacy technologies. And so a big focus for this year is really looking at where we can bring standardization, not just on the technology platforms and tools, but from a business process perspective, right? We've done a lot over the years in OI&T to really standardize on our technology platforms. Now it's time to leverage that to really bring standard processes to the business. And what that does is that really does help us continue to put the veteran at the center of everything that we do and gives a very predictable, very repeatable process and an expectation for veterans across the country so that you don't have different experiences based on where you live or where you're getting your health care and from what part of the organization. So there's a lot of great stuff there. We're also looking at a lot of advanced work in accelerating our claims automation, how we move things faster, better, more quickly, leveraging, artificial intelligence, better automation, and really trying to look at how we leverage the data that we have available to us at VA to take the burden off of what we're asking for the veteran to provide. And what can we auto-adjudicate? What can we auto-decision? Where can we bring the services and benefits of VA to the veteran versus having the veteran try to come to the VA and sort out, all the different processes and applications and things to access those services. So it's really, really exciting times here at the VA.
All right, several things to dig out from there. Let me start with maybe the easier one. The idea of standardizing processes from the business side, what is that starting to look like? Is that business process reengineering? Is this looking at, for instance, we have a process that we just picked up and moved, lifted and shifted into technology 25 years ago, and no one ever said, do we still need to do all these different things? we just have said for way too long, well, this way we've always done it? Or is there something more deeper?
No, I think that's a good part to maybe dig into. A lot of our technologies over the years have evolved as you would expect them to be. Decades ago, the default way to do things, and when you say you're going to automate something, would be to take your paper process and just digitize it and do the same thing that you do on paper, but now you're doing it instead of a pencil with a keyboard. That, of course, does not bring a lot of real automation to the process. It just digitizes the experience from a processor perspective. Does nothing to really improve the services to the end user, the veteran community. So what we're doing, again, back to the richness of the data and the standardization of our data, as we're looking at how we can eliminate as many steps in these processes as we can, where we have data to make decisions, or we can automate a lot of things that would completely eliminate what would be a paper process. That is our focus. So the bottom line here is we're trying to streamline it to the point that it's as fast and as efficient, secure, and accurate as possible from a VA processing perspective. And in turn, it's going to bring a decision back to the veteran a lot faster, and a decision that's ready to go on to the next step in the process. And so that's really what we're looking at in terms of rethinking everything that we do. Another good example would be where, let's say, I'll take the enterprise clinical contact centers as another good example, where historically we've had independent by-vision contact centers where veterans would call in, and they may have different workflows, different expectations, different processes, and frankly, different technology platforms that are driving those services. What we're doing today is we're bringing all those services onto a modernized enterprise level, enterprise class, world-class IT technology platform, and then working with the business to come up with one single standardized approach and process. So again, one platform, one process, one unified outcome, that all equals a much improved experience for the veteran.
You mentioned cybersecurity. I'll throw in privacy in there as well. Two big concerns / priorities for you as well. Let's talk about the security of that data. You mentioned zero trust, and then where does the privacy side obviously fit in? They're hand in hand, I get it, but how are you doing both?
No, they are definitely hand in hand. On the privacy side, we are looking at, again, standardizing our approach of privacy across the department as well. We've stood up a lot of working groups, a lot of activities around that to really identify what are the opportunities here that we can seize on, and how can we better manage this across the department. The protecting and the privacy veteran data is a sacred charge, just like it is for protecting it from a security perspective. It's something that we take very, very seriously. It's something that we know, in my opinion, that is some of the most sacred data that the government is responsible for storing, preserving, and protecting. And so we do invest a lot in both the security aspects of it, as well as the way that we do manage privacy across the board. And we do have some great things coming down the pipe in terms of how we're going to modernize this across the board. And so I'm looking forward to talking about that more in the future once we get to those critical milestones. But we are changing the game in that space here at VA.
All right, you left us a little bit of a tease. This is in the old school, a cliffhanger, if you will, Eddie. We'll have to come back and ask you about that in 3, 6, 9 months, however long you guys, until you guys start to roll that out. Let me pop back around to the top. You mentioned zero trust, a huge focus area for a lot of agencies. You mentioned microsegmentation. Where are you at on your zero trust journey, generally speaking? And what are some of those big priority areas you're going to go down next in 2026 and beyond?
Obviously, microsegmentation of the network. Also, our efforts on identity management, that is a big aspect of that as well. And look, we've got a ways to go, but we've come a ways as well, right? And so this is going to be something that, as we begin to modernize technologies, infrastructure across the department, baking in our deliverables for zero trust, for a better, more hardened cybersecurity footprint, is the critical core requirements now of everything that we do. So it's not something that we do after the fact. It's not something that we do on the side. This is fundamental to the way that we approach everything across the department now. So over the next several years, you're going to see that naturally evolve. In terms of where we are in the maturity model path, again, our approach here is not necessarily to try to map to a model. It's really to rationalize what are the highest value opportunities that those models bring, and then we prioritize on those activities first. So we we're not pursuing it in a linear fashion. We are taking parts and pieces, and what makes the most sense for the biggest bang for our buck right now, that's where we're putting our energy and effort.
That's Eddie Poole, the Acting Principal Assistant Secretary for Information and Technology and Acting Principal Deputy Chief Information Officer at the Department of Veterans Affairs. He's speaking there with Federal News Network's Executive Editor, Jason Miller. You can find this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com. Search Ask the CIO. Coming up next, federal leaders face the challenge of restoring stability and agency performance after months of workforce disruption. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Months of disruption have left some federal employees disengaged and others burned out. Lauren Parthamos of Cotter is here to explain what leaders must do to restore stability and psychological safety and to find a new normal going forward. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Carrie.
It has been a tough year for the federal workforce. I don't think that's an understatement. But here on the Federal Drive, we focused a lot on the impacts on individuals. And with you, I want to take it up a level and really talk about leaders and managers. What have been the biggest challenges for federal managers throughout this year?
I would say without a doubt, it's the uncertainty that people are seeing within the day-to-day. As a leader, having to navigate a field where you don't know what is going to come next is increasingly difficult, especially in times where you don't have necessarily the number of resources that you truly need to get the job done. And we're seeing that really play out in terms of both performance, in terms of how things are getting produced, how quickly they're getting produced, but also just on the health from a psychological standpoint of the individual employees that are within the workforce, and especially on the federal side. And how do we really make sure that we create, as leaders, a space where we can allow them to thrive as much as possible in this particular scenario? And how do we suppress that survive response to all the uncertainty and all of the nuance that is happening in the day-to-day that we're seeing?
We have talked a lot here about organizational health and how organizational health depends on individual worker health and how that health often depends on mental health. It seems like all of those connection points are under a lot of stress.
I unequivocally agree with that. Realistically speaking, at Cotter, our research validates that point that organizations that are anchored in adaptability and resilience are those ones that outperform. And as we see, especially in the federal space, it's difficult to build that resiliency consistently because of the amount of uncertainty that we're seeing. And so because there's that pull dragging people down, the level of anxiety, the lack of ability to actually meet your day-to-day needs as we're seeing shutdowns happen, there's an end-level performance there that's happening at the department and agency level that as leaders, it's trying to figure out how can we give as much stability as possible to our teams without necessarily knowing what we're capable of promising. And how do we make sure that we're communicating in a way that we're not just waiting till we have a definitive answer, but we're walking alongside our team saying, I also don't know, but here's what we're going to do in the interim.
You mentioned a term earlier, psychological safety. Can you break that out for us and tell us what it means both from the employee perspective and the leader-manager perspective?
Absolutely. From that psychological safety perspective, we've seen a massive erosion in the sense that as people are showing up to work, what was once seen as an incredibly stable job and a mission-driven job working for the federal workforce, some of those tenets about why people joined the service are no longer there because that stability is no longer there. We don't know if layoffs are coming. We don't know if we'll be in another shutdown. And when that really boils down to is, how do I feed my family? How do I make sure that I can pay my own bills? And without that level of safety of knowing that I have stability in my job and I can think through how do I perform and I can think through creative, innovative ways to get things done. Without that, you won't see any level of performance. And it's really been a sticking point for many people that I've been speaking to within the agencies.
Are you seeing that agencies have groups of employees maybe pitted against each other? We had furloughed and accepted folks. So many people worked, but without pay, and others didn't work. And, are there internal issues that leaders and managers are going to need to deal with?
None that anyone has openly admitted to me. I will leave it at that. But it is a natural feeling to say, if we're working on a skeleton crew, so to speak, and some of our team is furloughed while others are not, what does that look like when we all rejoin together? There's going to be those who are frustrated because they've had to work so hard during that furlough time without pay. There's those that were not furloughed that had to depend on each other, that maybe their teammates weren't showing up in a way that they necessarily resonated with because they might not have been giving their full selves because of the frustration of what they were dealing with. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily that people are pitted against each other, but more so that there's an understandable level of frustration given the ecosystem that they were subjected to. And how do you work through that as a leader, saying, for this time, we are all together. There is a potential that we will be in another shutdown. And what does that look like? And how can you really work with your team to make sure that you're front running any of those issues and thinking through the scenario planning to make sure that you have what you need and your team members understand the purpose and what we're really trying to accomplish at its core, so you can prevent any of those frustrations as they bubble up.
I'm speaking with Lauren Parthamos. She's a principal and public sector lead at Cotter. Lauren, the shutdown has come up a couple of times in our conversation. We're deep into the holiday season that comes with its own kind of stress. And when everybody's sort of fully back in January, they'll be staring potentially at another shutdown across several agencies. So if you're a leader in this scenario, maybe what's on your New Year's resolution list to think about, how do you reset for the work beginning in January?
I think that's a great question, because as I've talked to many leaders throughout this time, a lot of people are talking through, what does Q1 look like, or what does it immediately look like for what I need to accomplish? But we really need to be thinking longer term than that. And we really need to be thinking through what are our priorities and what are we deprioritizing? Because as we think about the impact that the shutdown had, I believe it was the Professional Services Council that has a statistic that it takes 3 to 5 days, not business days, but days to reset for each day of shutdown in terms of an agency's performance. Considering that it was 43 days, that's up to 7 months in order to get back to a stable state. So we're going to be working in an environment that is over capacity and behind with significant backlogs. So making sure that if you're anchoring on a why are we doing what we do, what is our goal as a team, and anchoring each task underneath that to that why, it will help prioritize what needs to be accomplished while simultaneously actively advocating for what no longer needs to be done during this time of prioritization. And that active advocating needs to happen within your own team, across teams, and also going up the chain as well, to make sure that there's a consistent understanding of what are we trying to accomplish. Because if you only focus on one small group, there's going to be a lack of understanding more broadly. And that will help teams as they go into January with the potential of another shutdown. So knowing, what are we trying to accomplish? What happens if we do? What happens if we do not shut down? And how can we come together to make sure that despite the headwinds, we are going to accomplish whatever we can? And I will say, a key for this is, it's not just the priorities of that we need to accomplish, but it's also, how do we as leaders implant short-term wins, as we like to call them at Cotter. So what are some small things to show that we've accomplished something? We've been successful. No matter how big or small, it does not matter, but it's something that you can celebrate around and rally around to get people energized. So it's not just a heavy weight of a continual backlog, but saying, we did something and we're making progress.
what might be one or two things that a team leader or a mid-level manager could actually do to get their team refocused on the why, on the priorities, on the outcomes? Should they have a potluck? Should they have a team day? What are some things that you recommend, actual steps?
I would say it's very team dependent, to be quite honest with you, because you could say, let's do a pizza party, and that will resonate so well with some groups, and other ones will see it as tone deaf in a way, saying, that's great that there's food here, but do you not see what's happening around us? And so I would say, first and foremost, as you're thinking about the state that individuals are in, it's that heavy survive of freeze likely, and it's making sure that as you think through what state these individuals are in, you're going on a listening tour, so to speak, to figure out what they actually need and want, and then respond in kind to the culture of that particular group. So it very much could be a potluck. It could be that part of your planning as you're thinking about going into January. You know your team will have heavy amounts of furloughs, and realistically speaking, the median federal employee only has about a week of pay in their bank account. So is it that we know this team is going to be furloughed, so let's think about meal trades. Let's think about how we can support each other in ways that are not just from a work perspective, but from a human element, because we are here for a mission. You're not joining the federal service to become the most rich and famous. You're doing it because you believe in the cause. So come together around that cause and find ways to truly support your people in the ways that you find that they need to be supported as a leader.
I've been speaking with Lauren Parthamos. She's a principal and public sector lead at Cotter. Lauren, thanks so much for grounding us back in what's really important.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule and on your device. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. More than a dozen federal statistical agencies are falling behind on producing high-quality data sets that impact the U.S. economy and government policy. The American Statistical Association finds changes under the Trump administration have led to certain public-facing data sets being delayed, suspended, or canceled. It's also flagging declines in public trust scores in data sets produced by the federal government. Federal News Network's Jory Heckman is here with more details. Jory, great to have you on.
Hey, Terry. Great to be here.
Hey, just refresh our memory to start with. What agencies make up the federal statistical system?
So this is about 13 agencies that we're talking about altogether. A handful of them are headquartered within the Commerce Department, but this is a group of agencies that really exists all over. Over at the Labor Department, there's the Bureau of Labor Statistics. At the Justice Department, the Bureau of Justice Statistics. And over at the Education Department, at least for now, is the National Center for Education Statistics. Gives you a constellation of different data sets that for a lot of policymakers out there, for a lot of people who are have their finger on the pulse of the economy, these are very critical numbers for people to understand where things are going and where things are point in time in the moment.
Of those, certainly the Bureau of Labor Statistics has been in the headlines, but what other sorts of challenges are these agencies facing?
So these agencies, like so much of the federal workforce, they are dealing with deep cuts to staffing. In a recent report from the American Statistical Association, they find that these cuts range from anywhere from 20 to 30% of overall staffing at these statistical agencies. Some cuts are more severe than others. And this is something that is raising alarm bells for folks who are in this space. We heard recently from Nancy Potok. She's the former chief statistician of the United States, and she's a co-author of this report. And she says that these agencies have seen a severe decline in their ability to meet their mission and that the status quo is no longer satisfactory.
What most people noticed was that many statistical products just disappeared. They either were eliminated in terms of no data collection taking place because contracts were cut or funding was cut or people weren't there, or because of the lack of staff.
How has the Trump administration reshaped how these statistical agencies actually work?
Beyond the budget cuts and the staffing cuts, the Trump administration has seen some high-profile situations where the president or his subordinates have stepped in and taken some actions here. One high-profile one this summer was Trump firing the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics after the agency produced monthly job numbers that were lower than folks had expected. And also, in recent months, the Social Security Administration's former chief data officer left the agency after filing a whistleblower complaint, alleging that the Department of Government Efficiency improperly put the sensitive data of more than 300 million Americans at risk, put it in an unsecured cloud environment that was vulnerable to adverse actors. Also, back in May, DOJ posted on its X account that the Census Bureau conducts more than 100 additional surveys beyond the 10-year population count that we're all familiar with. And DOJ, along with the Bureau, went through those surveys and got rid of 5 surveys that they deemed wasteful and obsolete.
What is the administration's position on all of these issues? I mean, these organizations have always been understood to be apolitical and objective.
We actually heard recently from the current chief statistician of the United States, Mike Calabria. He said in a keynote address at a think tank event that his priorities on the job are strengthening data security at statistical agencies and recognizing something that a lot of folks have pointed to, a long-term decline in response rates for those statistical surveys, something that is bedrock principle for these data sets to be any good.
People are going to be more reluctant to respond if they don't believe that their data is going to be secure and protected. And of course, I'm, a very big privacy advocate, and I want to make sure that whatever we do collect does not get hacked or breached, or that people feel confident that the data that they give the government is not going to be shared in ways that they haven't consented to.
And that's Mike Calabria. He's the current chief statistician of the United States. I did reach out for comment as putting together the story, and I did hear back from a senior administration official, not as sympathetic as Calabria. They said that the report's findings amount to, quote, typical swamp lobbying.
Well, that's an interesting description. What does the public have to say about the statistical agencies and the value of their information?
Overall, these trust scores are in decline, and they have been for quite some time. The numbers cited by this report from the American Statistical Association show that the percentage of U.S. adults who trust federal statistics fell from 57% in June to 52% in September. These are data points collected by the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. And the percentage of people who agree or strongly agree that they can trust federal statistical agency data and that they can keep their information confidential, that decreased by about 6% from 31% overall to 25% in that same time frame. It's worth pointing out that in addition to the things that we mentioned earlier with the Trump administration, there's been also some data sharing happening between agencies, most notably with the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. A lot of agencies are now sharing data with ICE, largely for immigration enforcement operations. And there have been a number of lawsuits that have been ongoing as a result of that. Just recently, in recent weeks, a federal judge did block the IRS from sharing data with ICE, and there are many other lawsuits like that still in the works.
Jory, as this federal statistical data becomes harder and harder to find, are there alternative data sets that folks can look to?
One thing worth flagging here is that the Data Foundation earlier this year did put together kind of a if you see something, say something type tool where people could report if data sets were missing, data sets that have always been publicly available, and to say if there are gaps in that data or if entire data sets have been pulled from .gov websites. That's one thing people have turned to. But some of these data sets, there really is no substitute for what these agencies have been able to produce. Of course, there are some proxies you can use to get around some of the gaps in the data, but a lot of the folks in this space, they are concerned that if these agencies aren't producing these data sets, then no one will be able to.
Federal News Network's Jory Heckman. Jory, thanks for pointing out this story for us.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editors are Daisy Thornton and Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.